Welcome to Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks, a show that provides extraordinary insights for product managers who want to go faster and farther in their product management careers.
Hello, this is JJ Rory, Vice President at Sequent Learning Networks. In our Masters of Product Management podcast, we tap into the experiences of people who work in and around product management to help you learn and grow in your product management career. All products have a lifespan. Some products live for a year or so. Some products, especially those attached to iconic brands, can live for decades or even longer. Legacy products and brands, those that have stood the test of time, carved a place for themselves in their marketplaces, often have this built-in credibility and sometimes can even have this sort of product folklore about them. But like every other product, these legacy products must from time to time reinvent themselves to ensure that they're continuously meeting ever-changing market dynamics and customer needs. And they must ensure that what they do to reinvent themselves actually takes into account a deep understanding of why that change is necessary in the first place. I remember back in the 1980s, kind of the quintessential case study for a new product, Coca-Cola and New Coke. You know, this comes to mind when I think of reinventing for the sake of change. Who wanted New Coke? Turns out most folks were perfectly happy with the old product. But oftentimes, products do need to reinvent themselves. They do need to find new ways to either meet new customer needs or to meet the needs of changing customer dynamics, right? Many physical products these days, they've been around forever, but they have to reinvent themselves by becoming connected products, if you will, right? Think of your garage door opener. You may be able to open that with an app on your phone these days. You can check whether or not you have milk in your refrigerator at home while you're standing in the grocery store, right? So there are some cool things that products that have been around forever have been forced to change to bring more value to customers in ever-changing dynamic markets. My guest today is here to talk about her experience in transforming an iconic brand and legacy product line within an iconic industry, that is the publishing industry, in ever-changing dynamic times. Ebony Shears is Vice President of Product at Forbes. She started at Forbes 5 years ago and currently leads a team of 16 product pros responsible for supporting, optimizing, and innovating its core ad-supported digital publishing business, as well as developing and launching products that represent new opportunities for the Forbes brand. Before joining Forbes, she had a lengthy career in the media industry, working in publishing, marketing, strategic communications, and even as a TV producer. Ebony, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, JJ. Thanks so much for having me. Although I will say you've given me far too much credit for leading the transformation of Forbes over the last 103 years. I've only been there for 5.
Yeah, maybe not 103 years, but you definitely played a big part in what it's become, right? And that's what's interesting. And I'm so excited about this conversation because Forbes and the publishing industry more generally is a great example of how, let's say in the last 10 to 20 years, organizations have had to find new ways to meet customer needs, right? I mean, it's kind of the old saying, right? You reinvent or you die on the vine. And so let's get to it. As you said, Forbes is a 103-year-old brand. So what has it been like to be in product at such an iconic brand? It's really led the industry transformation over this, past decade or so.
Indeed. And, it's funny because I decided I wanted to work in product after you mentioned a long career in the media industry. I decided, I really think this is where what I'm good at and what I like to do really converges. And I had not previously worked in product before Forbes. And so I did product school, one of the boot camps, and they introduced me to Forbes. And I remember back when I was interviewing for the job or when they had introduced the opportunity to me and they said, oh, there's this position available at Forbes. And I was like, Forbes, like the magazine? Like, I thought we were talking about digital product here. Like you're talking about the magazine, like the print publication. And, my first introduction to what Forbes was really doing digitally was through that interview process. And it really opened my eyes to not only how important innovation is to a company like Forbes, but also to how the people in the company have really led the industry in a number of ways. We just this year celebrated the 10th anniversary anniversary of our Brand Voice native content platform. And Forbes led the publishing industry with the development and introduction of a native publishing platform at a time when people were still sort of noodling around and trying to figure that out. And so it's really just one example of the ways in which Forbes has been out ahead of the industry and really valued innovation at its core. I mean, you can't survive 103 years without valuing innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that I think about. I had a very short stint in the publishing industry, and really it was just kind of almost a product line within my purview.
Mhm.
When I was the head of product at American Hospital Association, we had some magazines, and that native content, native publishing, that really was transformational in the industry. And of course, I'm going to give a layperson's explanation there, and that is basically having kind of thought leaders and others provide content, almost user-generated content, but I think I'm probably using that incorrectly. So correct me if I go astray on that native content definition. But that was something that really has changed the industry. And like you said, Forbes has really embraced that from the beginning and almost been the pioneer in that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key values that Forbes brings to the table is our reach, right? Like in the last year in particular, I mean, all digital publishers have seen an exponential increase in traffic over the last year based on the ridiculous news cycles that we've been in. But, we see something in the neighborhood of about 70 million users a month. And
Wow.
so brand voice and native content to us is really an opportunity for us to partner with brands to give them access to our audience, right? And they create content. Sometimes their teams create them. Many times our internal content team partners with them to help them create content that will resonate with our audience as well as represent their brand well. And we label it appropriately because, it is kind of an ad, but it's content.
Right.
And it really sort of, it's content. And I really want to underscore that because as much as we have to label it, because these brand partners do pay us for access to our platform, they're not writing ads. They're writing valuable content that gets published to our site that just so happens to be published by a brand.
Yeah, exactly. And those brands value because, again, they become, I mentioned the term thought leaders. That's what they want to be to their customers. They don't want to just serve up ads per se, which of course they do as part of their portfolio, but they want to be that thought leader, and having that access to the Forbes audience is huge. So that's a great example of one of the ways. So let's dig a little bit. When a company such as Forbes or any other organization that's going through this massive transformation, whether it's business model, product line, different user expectations, et cetera. What are some of the key things that need to be done, in your opinion and experience, when an organization is going through such a transformation?
One of the reasons I really have enjoyed and working in the media industry for so long is that media is one industry where, to the point that you made earlier, you have to innovate or you'll die, you'll wither on the vine. And you're forced to innovate and maintain relevance and currency because the readers or your audience, your users will tell you that they want something different. Or in the case of ad-supported media, your advertising partners will tell you that you need to do something different. So it requires constant transformation, constant innovation. And I think we've seen that play out, especially as it relates to local newspapers and, a lot of media outlets that over the last, 10, 15, 20 years have not been able to maintain pace with what's happened in the industry and with the shifting expectations of both their audience and their advertisers. And it's also one where, from a product perspective, our job really is to align the needs of the users, the needs of our business, and the needs of our advertisers. And I think it's for product people who work at SaaS companies, you swap out the advertisers for the clients who are actually paying you for the product. And it's probably a similar dynamic. But what I think is required, especially in media and for a 103-year-old brand, is always having the mechanism to have your finger on the pulse of what the requirements of your industry, your users, and your partners are. So even when it comes to social media, the advent of social media has really changed people's expectations in terms of the speed of information. I mean, I remember a number of years ago, you might look something up, this is 2021. If it was some information from 2017 or 2016, it seemed like it was good enough. It was, pretty recent. Now, any data or information that may have been pulled that long ago can sometimes feel dated, or the speed at which information moves means that you have gotten many updates potentially on a particular topic in those convening years. Between that and the fact that users can get access to so much free information on the internet, those are some of the things that we're grappling with as a media industry from a user standpoint. On the advertiser partner side, there's always technology that gives them better tools for targeting. And those tools are changing, and the rules around those tools are changing. This year, much of digital publishing is struggling with the so-called impending death of the third-party cookie, which everyone says with such a trepidation.
Right.
but it's those kinds of changes that mean that you've constantly got to be in touch with the data around how users are behaving. Like I said, we have 70 million visitors every month. And so it's hard to have a one-on-one relationship where you can really gather, subjective information. So we look a lot at the data. We have access to our internal revenue team, and that's our programmatic sales team, our direct sales team, our brand voice team, who's always feeding us back information about what the needs are around the technology, what clients are asking for. And as sales always works, they always need a new story to tell, right? So the imperative for us is also always to work with them to develop new ad products and updates to existing products so that they have a compelling story to tell about how these partners can tell their stories to the Forbes audience. So I think that those things are really important. And I think it's always also really important to think about when those sort of milestones and those points at which you have an opportunity to reinvent yourself a little bit. We, back in 2018, did an overhaul of Forbes.com. We completely redesigned the site. It wasn't the first time that's happened, but we had reached a point where it was the next step in the evolution of our overall digital product. And at that time, that our digital product was by and large free, at least to users, right? People could read as much content as they wanted. We didn't really have a focus on consumer revenue broadly as it relates to our digital product. And so now we find ourselves in 2021, and the end of last year, we have launched a metered paywall. Again, there are things that a lot of the media industry is struggling with in digital publishing is by and large looking at ways to diversify our revenue. And that was one step in that direction. But it really puts us in a position where we're having to pay even more attention to our users and in different ways because we want them to pay us, right? We don't just want them to visit and read our content. We want them to pay us for access to that content after they've read a certain amount of it. But also this year, we have quite a few other consumer revenue oriented initiatives in development, recently launched or in development. So we have one that's called AI Investor, which is geared toward people with investable assets that are interested in AI informed insights. We have recently announced an initiative called Journalist Entrepreneurs, which is a platform we're developing that puts the power into writers' hands to build an audience and monetize that audience in the form of paid newsletters. There's other, obviously, widely known platforms out there that allow them to do it, but none of them that provide the reach that Forbes can provide and the support that we can provide. Some of these other platforms, they give you tools, but they don't give you the reach and the promotion to our audience that Forbes is able to provide. And, those will be, again, paid newsletters. So again, we're looking at consumer focused products. And this is another major shift for us. And it's really creating a lot of opportunity. It is transformational for our company. It's creating a lot of opportunity in terms of revenue. It's creating a ton of opportunity in terms of our ability to really understand our users and what's valuable to them. And it also is creating opportunity for the product team because we are uniquely, in some ways, equipped within the context of our company to help build some of these products and platforms, just by nature of the mindset and the way that product people approach things. As a company that has not historically had a ton of new digital products introduced to the marketplace, our team really is in a position to build pilots, test, figure out what we can learn, iterate, figure out what an MVP looks like, all of the things that you want to do when you're when you're launching a new digital product. It really is an opportunity for product to sit at the center of a lot of the transformation that we're looking at happening this year and going beyond them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree. And I think media companies have, somewhat struggled with the idea of product management and what that means in their world. So when you and I met and started talking, I loved the fact that Forbes really had embraced this kind of a real product management model. And I think what you said is spot on. Again, I'm certainly not a media expert, but the leap from, especially on digital content, the leap from a user giving you their eyeballs versus giving you their money, right? There's a big hurdle there that media companies had to find how to get users and consumers to take that leap, right? The first step was something of interest to just give you just a visit, and then something so much of interest to give you their money. And I think the testing and the iterating and the kind of the core of a product team really understanding customers and getting there, using data, et cetera, all the things you said. I think that's a great point about how product management can help a company like that.
Yeah, indeed. And as far as the leap between getting people from, visiting us for free to paying us, there's also a step in the middle, which is just tolerating ads, right? Like readers barely want any ads on the page. They think that for some reason media companies should provide all of this stuff for free and everybody who works there should work for free or something. I don't know. But,
sure. Come on, Ebony, get with it.
But the point I made earlier, there's so much free content out there, and also so many ways that people will even take content that should be paid and repost it somewhere else, that the tolerance for wanting to pay for content is so low, or can be so low. And so really the imperative really is on us to figure out the ways that we can provide value against what we're asking of users, whether it's looking at our, tolerating our ads or providing us with first party data to support the direction that we're going, as far as being able to let our advertising partners target our audiences to a paywall or some of these other paid products. And so the use cases and the needs of the users are very different in those instances. And it really does take a lot to pay attention to all of that as these new products and things are emerging within our company. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's fun. It's fun, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Kind of thing where, to your point about us being a 103-year-old company, it's not the kind of work that you might expect to be doing at a 103-year-old company. But quite frankly, it's part of the reason why I love my job, because there is always something new, something different, something engaging, a new problem to solve. And the combination of being able to leverage an iconic brand with the imperative to reinvent and reintroduce and transform is what's really exciting, I think, about working at Forbes.
So I want to ask you about your internal stakeholders. That includes your product team, but also your cross-functional partners internally, right? How do you get everyone on board when you're going through this transformation and you're trying to get them to buy into who you'll be in the future, right? Sometimes maybe you even have to upskill or change out people in some areas if you're moving different directions, product-wise, business model-wise, et cetera. How do you manage and influence and lead those stakeholders internally when you're doing something like this?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that, as exciting as it is that the role that product plays within Forbes, and as excited as we are about how that role is evolving relative to this transformation that we're going through right now, Forbes hasn't really been a product-led company. And what I mean by that is that there have been many instances where ideas have originated within the product team, or we've certainly worked with stakeholders to identify pain points and the problems that they're trying to solve, and collaborated with them to define the appropriate solutions, whether it's our newsroom or our revenue teams, et cetera. But a lot of times the idea for a thing, and especially a new thing, originates outside of the product team. And so many times it's not that we need necessarily to get people on board with like a, hey, we should do this in a hey, we should do this kind of way. It's more, here's how we should do this. That is the conversation that we're having with stakeholders. And, one of the challenges that I face with my team is making sure that they are consistently asking the questions, asking all of the questions, identifying the problems, identifying the opportunities, as opposed to taking requirements from stakeholders, right? So having a stakeholder come and say, hey, here's what we want, go build this thing. It's a constant conversation with my team saying, well, do we know, where they're like, yeah, we're going to build this thing because such and such said they wanted to build this thing. I'm like, but why? Why are we building that thing? And so that is constant on our team. And it's funny because this week Marty Kagan is doing a new workshop around his book, Empowered, that is more around building empowered product teams. And he categorizes them in 3 categories: a delivery team, which is very much, let's move things from A to B and get them out the door. Feature team, which is a little bit more into discovery, but still is kind of like, a little bit more glorified project manager. And then the empowered team. And I think that at least in our particular workshop cohort, probably 90% of us fall into the feature team, right? And that dynamic is really defined by people in the company coming and telling you what you should build, and then you kind of like work it out. Like, you put it on the roadmap and you build the thing. And it's a pretty big leap going from that to the empowered team. And a lot of that has to do with how product sits within your company and how the kind of value that your stakeholders and executives think that you can deliver. And that's the other key conversation that I have with the people on my team, is constantly like, what business value are you looking to drive with this feature, this product, this solution that you're aiming to deliver? So I'm actually really proud of the relationships that we've cultivated as a team with our stakeholders. Again, we kind of have, up to last year, we've had 2 primary groups of stakeholders, I'll call them. One is our editorial stakeholders. That's our staff writers, our newsroom, as well as our contributor network of approximately 3,000 writers that are managed by some of the people in the newsroom or edited by some of the people in the newsroom. And then our revenue stakeholders, which again includes our programmatic sales and optimization team, our direct sales, and our content studio and brand voice partners. This past year, that has also expanded to include our consumer revenue team, which we had not really worked very closely with. But again, we're developing more consumer-focused products, and so we've worked very closely with them. But it's important to understand what these stakeholders, what their priorities are. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? The revenue team, like, what are we selling? What are clients asking for? How's the dynamic on the programmatic exchanges changing? What is this third-party cookie situation? How do we need to be in a position to deal with that? And that extends to our direct sold advertising as well. On the editorial side, like, how can we empower the newsroom and our contributors to create better content, better performing content that also helps us achieve our business, our goals as a company? The kind of content that's going to attract the audiences basically that are valuable to our advertisers. And also, I mean, I qualify those 2 as our sort of primary stakeholders, but we also obviously have our engineering and design teams, and I think of them more as like partners and collaborators than I do as stakeholders. But that is the imperative for us, because we, like I said before, we have to align the needs and what's valuable to our audience and the needs and what's valuable to our advertisers, because without our audience, our advertisers don't care about us. Right. You have to be able to aggregate the eyeballs in order to get the advertisers on board. So it's interesting and always evolving, because as you can imagine, as we continue to develop some of these consumer-oriented products, it's the imperative being to diversify our revenue. It's not like where we can walk away from display advertising. That's our bread and butter. We have to be able to optimize that. We have to be able to look for new opportunities to, expand our inventory, to, introduce new ad products and all of that. But at the end of the day, in collaboration with all of these stakeholders, our job is to optimize revenue for the company, right? And so there are some trade-offs that we consistently are making, or at least things that we are testing to figure out where is the best opportunity for revenue for us here. So I'll give you an example. We, as many media sites do, when you show up on our site with an ad blocker, we say, oh no, you can't proceed from here. You either need to disable your ad blocker or do something else. When we first introduced ad block detection, it was a product that was geared toward preventing people from proceeding with an ad blocker, but we didn't have a paywall in place. So the options were disable or register to create an account. So we're starting to build our first party data around you, and we're at least capturing that, and there's some value. And also we have the ability to, show certain kinds of ads while you're on the site. We've now introduced a paywall, and so we're testing out whether there's more value in getting a user who won't disable to register, or whether there's more value in asking them to subscribe. Will they subscribe? We don't see a ton of. We have changed our ad block detection so that right now you have to disable or subscribe, and we don't see a ton of conversion at that ad block wall as expected. We didn't expect people to pull out their credit cards in droves just to get beyond ad block detection. It's just not characteristic of that user. But now what we're going to test is, if we identify you as a user who is more likely to subscribe or less likely to subscribe, if you're less likely to subscribe and we show you registration, we still have an opportunity to optimize what we're doing with you, because we are going to gather some, first party data. We're going to ask you for data. We're going to, be able to leverage that and create and use that in all the ways we use first party data. But if we identify you as more likely to subscribe, we'll say you can disable or subscribe. So that's an example of working collaboratively with several stakeholders. It's our revenue, it's our consumer marketing department, our editorial, for all intents and purposes, because they're always interested in the ways in which we provide access to our content. But it's really a great example of getting our stakeholder groups together with the common goal of how do we optimize revenue for the company, and not sort of in these silos.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's such a good example, and it really just gets to the crux of it. I loved what you said about your product team and how you coach them and make sure that you always get to the why. I tell product managers, don't be order takers, right? It's not meant to be derogatory in any way, but it's just meant that you're a strategic partner here. And so if you have a stakeholder that wants something, don't jump to solution immediately and just take the order, if you will. But yeah, use your expertise and really start to dig why. And I love the collaborative nature that you just explained there. So this has just been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Ebony Shears, Vice President at Forbes, for joining me and sharing your insights and experience.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, JJ.
You bet. And thank you for joining us on Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks. I am JJ Rory, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks. If you'd like to take your career to the next level with additional tools, training, coaching, and books, be sure to visit Sequent Learning Networks at sequentlearning.com.